He wore a ring she couldn't ignore, worn silver, quietly defiant. When her Mustang broke down on a dusty back road, the last thing she expected was a poor mechanic with hands that healed more than engines, and a secret that would change her life. Before we begin this unforgettable journey of second chances and quiet miracles, don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories that linger long after the last word. Now let's begin. The Arizona sun baked the winding asphalt as Savannah Cole's vintage 1968 Mustang sputtered its final breath and rolled to a dead stop along the dusty shoulder of a back road. For the first time in years, she was truly alone. No assistant, no driver, no reception, just the hum of cicadas and the distant rumble of a train. She exhaled through gritted teeth, pushing her designer sunglasses higher onto the bridge of her nose. Perfect, she muttered. Her life had been meticulously choreographed for over a decade, and now under this relentless sun, her perfectly timed itinerary had just flatlined. She slammed the car door harder than she intended and scanned the horizon. Heat waves danced off the hood like taunts. In the distance, a weather-worn sign with flaking red paint read Bennett's Garage. 1 mile. The walk was longer than expected. Gravel crunched beneath heels that were never meant for anything but penthouse lobbies. Her linen blouse clung to her back. When the garage finally came into view, it looked more like a relic from the 1950s than a functioning business. A pair of legs in dusty work boots stuck out from under a lifted truck. A clatter of metal, then a grunt, and the man rolled out from beneath the chassis. He was in his early 40s, lean with sun-tanned skin and tousled hair, the color of rust. His blue eyes flicked up at her calm and unreadable. A smudge of grease streaked his cheek, and a faded name patch on his shirt read, "Jack." "You lost?" he asked. "My car broke down a mile back," she said. Mustang classic. His brows lifted with what might have been admiration, then settled into a faint smile. "Nice choice. Let me grab my tools. No tow truck." He tilted his head, slightly amused. "This far out, lady. I am the tow truck." Within minutes, he returned with a battered Chevy tow rig and a quiet efficiency that unnerved her. He didn't ask questions, didn't make small talk. Just loaded the car, drove her back, and parked it beside a rusted Thunderbird. Inside the garage, time had stopped. A rotary phone, a Coca-Cola clock that looked older than her wooden shelves, stacked with parts, belts, tools, and dust. The air smelled like oil, heat, and something old, something steady. "I'll need a day or two," Jack finally said, wiping his forehead with a rag. "She's got a tired heart." "So do I," she mumbled, before realizing it had escaped her lips. He looked up. Their eyes locked for a long moment. A silence, warm, unthreatening, hung between them before he nodded toward a metal chair. "You can wait here, or there's a diner across the road. Rosie makes a mean peach pie." Savannah hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the middle of nowhere. No meetings, no assistants, no curated choices. Just a man with grease on his hands and a surprising gentleness in his voice. She sat. He returned to work, whistling softly as he leaned over her Mustang's open hood. The way he moved, steady, rhythmic, deliberate, was oddly calming. For the first time in a long time, Savannah just watched, not judged, not calculated. Watched, and then she saw it. The ring on his left hand. Silver worn smooth, the kind of ring that had been put on in love and never taken off. Not flashy, not fashionable, personal. "You're married?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Jack didn't look up. "No, not anymore. But you still wear the ring." He paused, adjusted something under the hood, and said simply, "Some things you don't take off." She opened her mouth to ask more, but stopped. His tone wasn't defensive, but it was final. Across the room on a side table, she noticed a framed photograph. A young woman with auburn hair and a wide smile, eyes that mirrored Jack's, maybe a sister. Maybe more. She didn't ask. That evening, Savannah checked into the only motel in town, a row of stucco-walled rooms with flickering porch lights and desert winds howling faintly past the window. She sat on the edge of the bed with a grilled cheese on a paper plate and stared at the ceiling fan spinning in slow, hypnotic circles. She thought of Jack. His hands, that ring, the way he didn't ask who she was or what she did. The way he looked at the engine like it had a story worth listening to. For a woman whose calendar was usually booked to the second, Savannah found herself watching the clock, not because she had somewhere else to be, but because she wanted to return. And she didn't even know why. The morning air in the desert was cooler than Savannah expected, crisp enough to make her pause as she stepped outside the motel room. She cradled a paper cup of weak coffee from the lobby and looked across the road, where Bennett's garage sat in the blush of dawn. The sky above it was painted in pastels, peach lavender, pale blue, as if the town had borrowed some piece from the heavens. She wasn't sure why she was up so early, or why her first instinct had been to cross the street instead of calling a car service to rescue her. But something about yesterday had lingered. Something in Jack Bennett's quiet presence that tugged at a place she'd long silenced. When she pushed open the garage door, a familiar metallic creak greeted her. Jack was already working, hunched over her Mustang. Sleeves, rolled up hair, slightly damp from a recent rinse. He looked up surprised. Not that she was there, but that she was early. "You're back," he said simply. "You still have my car," she replied, raising her cup like a half-hearted toast. "Thought I'd check if you'd run off with it." Jack smirked, and for a flicker of a moment, it lit up something softer in him. Not much of a getaway car when it won't start. Savannah leaned against the wall, her eyes following the deliberate movements of his hands, strong, sure, practiced. "Do you always open this early?" "I never really close," he said without looking up. "Town's quiet." "Mornings help me think about engines." She asked. About people, he answered, and the words hung in the air like a bell that had just been struck. She wasn't ready for that answer, and Jack didn't elaborate. Instead, he picked up a carburetor and studied it like a riddle waiting to be solved. Savannah wandered to the side table and looked again at the framed photo from the day before. The woman's smile was all warmth, as if the sun had kissed her into existence. She had Jack's eyes. "Your wife, Savannah?" asked gently. Jack glanced over. "My sister." "Lila." Savannah nodded, relieved for a reason she couldn't name. "She looks like someone who'd laugh at her own jokes." "She did?" Jack said, and something like grief passed through his expression. Not fresh pain, but the kind that lived, like weather always present, always shifting. "What happened?" she asked softly. He set the carburetor down. "She was born with a congenital heart defect, made it to 32, which was longer than they predicted. I took care of her after our parents passed." She was everything. Savannah's throat tightened. She hadn't expected to be handed something so raw so early in the day. "Is that why you stayed here, in this town?" Jack nodded. Didn't want to leave her behind. Didn't have to anyway. This garage kept us afloat. Gave me something to do. Something to build. "And the ring," she ventured. He looked down at it, turned it slowly with his thumb. "She gave it to me when she realized I'd never marry." Said every good man needed a promise to keep Savannah. Didn't know what to say to that. Not because it was awkward, but because it was real. It was the kind of sentiment no one in her world of mergers and deadlines would ever say out loud. She must have meant a lot to you, she said. Finally, she reminded me who I was supposed to be. The quiet that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was full of things unspoken and memories neither of them shared, but somehow understood. Jack wiped his hands and gestured toward the diner. "Have you had breakfast?" Savannah smiled. "This counts." She raised her near-empty coffee. "Come on," he said, grabbing his keys. "Rosie's got real coffee and eggs that don't taste like regret." They crossed the road in silence. The diner was a postcard from 1975. Leather booths, checkered floors, a jukebox in the corner playing something soft from Fleetwood. Mac Rosie, a stout woman with bright eyes, and a voice like gravel waved them in. "You bringing strays in now, Jack?" she teased. "She's got good taste in cars," he replied. Savannah found herself laughing genuinely at the exchange. They slid into a booth, and for a moment it felt absurd how natural it was, as if she hadn't met this man less than 24 hours ago. Over coffee and eggs they talked about nothing and everything. He told her about the time he and Lila turned the garage into a haunted house for Halloween. She told him about how she once signed a deal in Paris and forgot what day it was back home. He listened without trying to fix her. She responded without trying to impress him, and when their plates were empty and the coffee had cooled, Jack leaned back and said, "Most people come through here looking to leave. And I don't know yet," he said. Smiling, Savannah looked out the window. The sun was higher now. Her car was still broken. Her schedule was still wrecked. And yet, for reasons she couldn't yet name, she felt like something inside her was finally maybe being rebuilt. Not fast, not flashy, but steady. Like a man turning a wrench with reverence. Like a ring worn not out of grief, but out of promise. The rain came unexpectedly that afternoon. Fat drops splashing against the tin roof of Bennett's garage, with a rhythm that felt more like memory than weather. Savannah stood by the open bay door, arms crossed, watching the storm soak the red dirt road and turn the air into the scent of wet clay and engine oil. She hadn't planned to stay this long. The tow, the conversation, the breakfast, all of it was supposed to be temporary, a detour on her path back to polished glass offices and executive briefings. But Jack hadn't finished with the Mustang yet, and she hadn't asked him to hurry inside the garage. Jack moved like a craftsman, not a laborer. Every tool returned to its hook, every motion deliberate. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words stayed with her, like rain on a windshield. She had come to appreciate his silence, not as a void, but as space to breathe, to remember who she was before the world taught her to be someone else. "I tightened the fuel line," he said, wiping his hands. "She might cough a bit at first, but she'll run." Savannah turned from the doorway, rain glistening in her hair. "I've been around a lot of men who claim to know engines. You're the first who actually listens to them." Jack offered a small smile. Cars don't lie. People do. She didn't know why that hit her the way it did. Maybe because she had spent most of her adult life surrounded by people who spoke in half-truths and full motives. Thunder rolled in the distance. A gust of wind swept through the open bay, carrying with it a chill that raised goosebumps on her arms. She reached for the old denim jacket Jack had lent her earlier, the one with the faint scent of pine and something warm, like worn leather and long drives with windows down. As she slipped it on, her eyes caught a glint of silver again. The ring. It was such a simple thing, really. Just metal, worn, scuffed, but it held him in a way nothing else did. "You ever think about taking it off?" she asked, voice soft. Jack didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the workbench and adjusted a small vice grip. Rain pattered against the windows in steady rhythm. "She gave it to me when she knew she was leaving," he finally said. Lila had this way of saying goodbye, like it was a promise instead of an ending. She said, "As long as I wore it, I'd remember what love sounds like." Savannah blinked, caught off guard. "What it sounds like?" Jack nodded, his voice lower now. "Not just the big stuff. Not I love yous or grand speeches, but the quiet things, like when she'd hum along to the radio while making coffee, or the way she'd say my name when she knew I was tired. Love has a sound, Savannah. You hear it when everything else is still." Savannah didn't realize tears had gathered until one slid down her cheek. She turned away quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be," Jack replied. "You're just hearing it too." They stood in silence, listening to the rain, to the ticking of an old clock, to something else, something unspoken that curled warm and unhurried between them. She crossed the room, slowly drawn, not by curiosity anymore, but by something deeper, reverence maybe. She reached out gently, brushing her fingers near the ring but not touching it. Do you think she began that people like her come back to us, not in ghosts or visions, but in the way we change? Jack looked at her with a softness that made her feel entirely seen. "I think they never really leave," he said. "They just wait for us to catch up." The words wrapped around her like a blanket. She hadn't known how badly she needed to hear them. Outside, the rain began to slow. The clouds softened, and golden light cracked through the gray, casting a soft glow over the garage. The scent of rain and rust mingled like something sacred. Jack cleared his throat, almost shy. "I'm heading out to Lila's tree later. You can come if you want." Savannah nodded, surprised by how quickly she said yes. They drove in silence down a gravel road that twisted through open fields and sagging fence lines. At the edge of a quiet meadow stood a lone willow tree, its branches trailing like fingers in prayer. Jack knelt beside a flat stone, nestled among wildflowers. He placed a small gear, a polished piece of the first engine they'd rebuilt together at the base. She always said machines were like people. He said, needed care, patience. Time. Savannah stood behind him, hands folded, feeling like she had stepped into a memory. Not her own, but one she somehow belonged to. When Jack stood, he didn't speak. He just looked at her eyes full of something that wasn't grief anymore, but gratitude. As they walked back to the truck, the last raindrop fell, landing on Jack's hand, right on the silver ring. He didn't brush it away. And Savannah didn't look away. The next morning, Savannah awoke to the unfamiliar sound of birdsong, unfiltered, unapologetic, and somehow comforting. She sat up slowly, blinking against the pale light, seeping through the blinds of the motel room. For the first time in weeks, her body didn't ache from tension, and her phone buried in her purse, and long out of signal wasn't blinking with alerts. She got dressed, simply denim jeans, a cotton tee, hair pulled back, and crossed the street, just as the first trucks were passing through town. Bennett's garage stood like a sentinel, unchanged, unbothered by the shifting world around it. Jack was already outside, crouched beside a boy, no older than 10, with a mangled bicycle. The boy looked impatient. Jack looked patient enough for both of them. You see that Jack pointed at the chain. It's not broken, just slipped. The boy freckled, and Fidgety scowled. I told you it was busted. You told me it wouldn't move, Jack said with a grin. There's a difference. Savannah lingered by the edge of the building, watching. Jack adjusted the chain, wiped the grease from his fingers, and gave the tire a spin. It whirred smoothly. The boy's face lit up like someone had flipped a switch inside him. Thanks, Mr. B, he shouted, Hopping on and riding off down the street, Jack stood brushing dust off his jeans. That's Tommy. Comes by once a week. Usually breaks something, just so we can fix it. Savannah stepped forward amused. And you don't mind. Jack shrugged. Gives him something to believe in. Every kid needs that. She was quiet for a moment. Who gave it to you? He looked at her eyes, thoughtful. Lila, and my high school shop teacher, Mr. Galloway. He saw something in me I didn't know was there. They walked into the garage together, the air warm with morning sun and the scent of motor oil. Jack returned to the Mustang, and Savannah took her usual seat on the stool nearby. She realized, strangely, it felt like her stool. Now, you ever think about leaving this place? She asked Jack. Paused, tightening a bolt. I used to have a scholarship to Arizona Tech, full ride. But then Dad passed, and Lila started getting worse. I stayed. Savannah studied his profile, the concentration, the wear in his hands. Do you regret it? No, he said without hesitation. Life gave me someone to protect. That's not something you regret. She felt a tightness in her chest. It was the kind of clarity she had chased her whole life in boardrooms and balance sheets and never found. Until now. Do you ever wonder who you'd be if things had gone differently? She asked. Jack leaned back, wiping his hands on a rag. Sure, but I'd probably still smell like grease and coffee, just in a bigger garage. She laughed the sound, catching them both by surprise. It was genuine, warm, the kind that made Jack smile in return, unfiltered and easy. Later that day, Savannah wandered into town. She passed Rosie's Diner, where a few locals nodded at her, like she'd been there longer than 2 days. She stopped at the general store and picked up a bottle of lemonade, then paused at a corkboard near the register cluttered with flyers. One in particular caught her eye. Hope Motors. Vocational program for teens, sponsored by Whitmore Industries. It had her company's logo. She hadn't even known about it. Savannah traced the edges of the flyer with her finger. Her assistant must have pushed the partnership through. It was a pilot project. Minimal funding, meant to make headlines, not change lives. But looking at it, now, thinking of Jack and the boy with the bicycle, it suddenly felt small, and she wanted to make it bigger. Back at the garage, she found Jack helping a man unload a broken lawnmower. She waited until he was alone, then stepped into the bay. Jack, she said, holding up the flyer, if someone wanted to start a real program like this, teaching kids how to work with their hands, giving them skills, a future, what would it take? He looked at the flyer, then at her. A building tools, mentors, a lot of time, and you. I've got time, he said. If it's for something that matters, Savannah smiled. Then let's build it. For a long moment he didn't respond. Then he walked to a drawer, pulled out a tape measure, and handed it to her. Let's start with this. They stood there in the middle of the garage, surrounded by the ghosts of old engines and fresh purpose. And for the first time, Savannah wasn't thinking about what she had to leave behind. She was thinking about what she could help build. By the third day, the rhythm of the town had begun to settle into Savannah's bones. Slow, deliberate, and curiously freeing. The constant tension she wore in her shoulders had started to ease, replaced by a subtle awareness that time here didn't move in calendar blocks or quarterly reports. It flowed differently, like syrup over warm bread, unrushed, intentional real. She stood in front of the small mirror in the motel room, brushing her hair with absent strokes. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Jack holding a brown paper bag and wearing an expression that hovered between confidence and hesitation. Rosie made extra, he said. Thought maybe you'd be tired of grilled cheese. Savannah stepped aside. Come in, but only if there's pie. There's always pie, he replied, stepping into the room that still smelled faintly of motel soap and sun-dried linens. She cleared the small table near the window, and he unpacked 2 containers, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a third, with 2 slices of peach pie, that steamed slightly beneath the plastic lid. "Home cooked by a diner queen," he said, handing her a fork. They ate in companionable silence, at first the kind that had become their signature. Jack didn't press. Savannah didn't deflect. Instead, they talked like people who were learning to speak a new language, one built on honesty and the quiet understanding that some stories unfold best when they're not rushed. So Jack said between bites, "You always fix towns when you pass through." Savannah smirked. "Only the broken ones," he nodded thoughtfully. "What about yourself?" She looked down at her fork, still working on that. They finished the meal and left the pie untouched for a moment, as if it marked a shift in the conversation. Neither wanted to initiate too soon. Jack leaned back, arms crossed. "Why did you really come here, Savannah?" "It wasn't just the car. I didn't come here," she said. "The car did. I just followed," he chuckled softly. "Fair enough." A pause stretched between them, gentle but heavy. "My husband died 3 years ago," she said. Suddenly, Jack didn't flinch, didn't interrupt, just waited. It wasn't sudden. It was cancer. Long, slow, cruel. The kind that takes pieces of you before it takes the rest. He nodded, gaze steady. "That's how I lost my mom." Savannah blinked at him, surprised. "Really pancreatic." He said I was 19. She made it 10 months. Never once complained. Mine kept pretending she'd beat it until the end. I think she did it for me. I kept pretending too. Even when I was already grieving her, and he was still breathing. For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the motel's ancient refrigerator. Jack finally spoke. "That flyer you found. Hope Motors." "You know it started because of a letter." Savannah tilted her head. "A letter?" "Lila wrote it to a kid she met once. He came through the garage, got kicked out of school. No one thought he'd amount to much. She spent an hour teaching him how to change a spark plug. Wrote him a letter after. Said, 'The world will tell you you're broken. Find people who'll remind you you're just unfinished.'" Savannah felt something shift inside her, a click in a lock she didn't know she'd been carrying. "I want that to be more than a line on a flyer," she said. "I want it to mean something." Jack smiled, not with pride, but with quiet approval. "Then you already know what to do." She reached for the pie. "Then we celebrate with this." He raised his fork to unfinished people. They ate under the hum of a flickering ceiling light, and for the first time in years, Savannah felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not as a CEO, not as a widow, but as a woman with pie, and a man who wore a ring, not for mourning, but for remembering. As he stood to leave, Jack paused at the door. "You know," he said, "this town may be slow, but it notices things. Like when someone shows up and starts looking less like they're passing through." Savannah met his gaze. "And what do they look like?" He thought for a moment, like they've remembered something worth staying for. When the door closed behind him, Savannah stood for a long while, staring at the empty plate and the fading echo of his words. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, she felt like she had just begun to remember too. The next morning brought with it a crisp breeze and a clarity that Savannah hadn't felt in years. She stood outside the garage with a mug of Rosie's strong black coffee, watching the horizon blur where the golden fields met the pale sky. Jack was under the hood of the Mustang again, his silhouette framed by the open bay door, moving with the same steady rhythm she'd come to admire. For a moment, she just watched. Then she walked in and set the coffee beside him. "Thanks," he said, without looking up. "You almost done?" she asked. "Just about." "You'll be back on the road by sunset if you want to be." There it was the choice. It had been hovering for days, unspoken, but always present. She could leave, resume her life, go back to the polished skyscrapers and scheduled silence. Or she could stay in this forgotten town with its broken bikes and borrowed pie, with a man who spoke like the world wasn't rushing him toward anything. "You ever think about what might have been?" she asked, watching the dust swirl in the sunbeams slanting through the rafters. Jack glanced at her, squinting slightly, but "I try not to live there." "Why not?" "Because if I start looking too far behind, I'll miss what's right in front of me." She nodded slowly, turning that over in her mind. He closed the hood of the Mustang and wiped his hands on a faded red rag. "I did have dreams. You know, big ones." "Tell me." Jack leaned against the car arms, folded. "When I was 17, I had a notebook full of plans. I wanted to design engines, cleaner, smarter. I had sketches, formulas, ideas for solar integration before it was cool. Arizona Tech offered me a full ride." Savannah blinked. "That's impressive. I was going to change the world," he said, his voice laced with a wistful kind of humor. "But then Dad died. And Lila, she needed someone." Savannah's voice was gentle. "So you stayed." I told myself it was temporary, just until she stabilized. But life doesn't wait for your schedule, and you don't regret it. "No," he said. "I don't. Because sometimes the world doesn't need another engine design. Sometimes it just needs someone who shows up." Savannah looked at him, truly. "Looked. You're still that guy. You know, still designing things just with your hands instead of blueprints." He smiled. "And you, what did you want?" Before the corner office and investor calls, the question surprised her. Savannah looked down at her hands. "I wanted to open a bookstore, one with creaky wooden floors and overstuffed chairs. I even had a name picked out. Dog-eared." Jack chuckled. "That's good." My father laughed when I told him. Said it was cute. Said I should think bigger. "And so you did." Jack said. She nodded. "But sometimes I think I got so busy proving him wrong, I stopped asking myself what felt right." There was a pause, not awkward, but heavy with meaning. Then Jack straightened. "Come with me, where you'll see." They got into the old Chevy truck, its seat cracked and worn but oddly comforting. Jack drove them out of town past the fields and forgotten barns onto a stretch of road, with no signs, just earth and sky and time. Eventually, he turned onto a dirt path that led to a wide-open plot of land. The foundation of an old building still lingered, long since crumbled, but not forgotten. "What is this place?" Savannah asked, stepping out. Jack smiled, walking toward the foundation. "Lila's dream." She used to talk about opening a community garage here, not just a place to fix cars, but to fix people too. Teach kids skills, give single moms free repairs, offer coffee and company to the lonely. Savannah turned in a slow circle, imagining it. Walls rebuilt, laughter in the air, hands learning to build again. She called it the Haven, Jack said. But we never got the funding, and after she passed, I couldn't do it alone. Savannah looked at him, then at the land. "What if you didn't have to?" Their eyes met. No speeches, no dramatic music, just two people standing in the middle of nowhere, where something could begin again. Jack stepped closer. "Are you saying you'd stay?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I'm saying, I don't want to leave yet." He nodded, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were softer than she'd ever seen. "Then we'll start here," he said. One bolt at a time, they stood there until the sun began to dip low, casting golden shadows over the land, turning ruin into possibility. And for the first time in a very long while, Savannah didn't feel lost. She felt found. The next few days unfolded like a slow sunrise, quiet, golden, full of possibility. Savannah stayed. She didn't tell anyone at the office, didn't check her email, didn't call her assistant. For the first time in years, she let the world run without her, and it hadn't crumbled. She spent her mornings helping Jack at the garage, learning the difference between a torque wrench and a socket set, laughing when her hands got stained with grease. In the afternoons, they drove to the Haven, measuring out spaces, sketching layouts, making lists of what they would need. At night, they sat on the back of his truck and talked until the stars blinked to life. There was no label for what was happening between them. No declarations, no timelines, just a closeness that grew like ivy, quiet, persistent, inevitable. But even in warmth, there are shadows. It was a Thursday morning when it happened. Savannah was behind the counter of the garage, organizing a drawer Jack hadn't touched in years. It was full of old receipts, handwritten invoices, spare keys, and curled photos. Buried beneath a stack of yellowed papers, she found a folder labeled Lila's Place. She opened it. Inside were sketches, floor plans drawn with care notes in the margins, in a woman's rounded handwriting, budget breakdowns, names of donors who had backed out ideas for outreach. At the very bottom was a typed letter with a familiar logo, Whitmore Industries. Her breath caught. It was addressed to Lila Bennett, dated 10 years ago. A rejection notice, courteous, professional, and cold. Savannah's name was signed at the bottom, her full title in bold. She sank into the chair, the letter trembling in her hands. She had no memory of it, no recollection of denying a small-town dream. But the signature was hers. The decision had been hers. Jack stepped into the garage, wiping sweat from his brow. "Hey, we're low on." He stopped mid-sentence. Savannah looked up, eyes wide with guilt. "Jack, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't remember this." He took the letter from her hand, read it once, and went very still. The air shifted. The distance between them, once invisible, now felt vast. She believed in that dream, Jack said quietly. She sent out proposals, letters, sketches. Months of hope. That rejection, it broke her more than she let on. Savannah stood heart-thudding. I was probably just following protocol, approving a denial based on ROI or projected media coverage. I didn't know her name. I didn't know you. "I know," he said, but his voice was hollow. She stepped closer. "Let me make this right." Jack didn't move. "You are, but not as penance. Not because of guilt. You can't build the Haven to erase this." Savannah swallowed hard. "Then tell me why I'm still here." Jack looked at her, then his expression softening but edged with something sharper. "Truth. Because this town changed you," he said. "Because maybe you were always that girl who wanted to run a bookstore. But somewhere along the line, someone made you feel like that wasn't enough." She blinked back sudden tears. "I don't want you to fix this for me, or for Lila." Jack continued. "I want you to fix it for you." Silence hung between them, delicate and dangerous. Then Savannah exhaled. Maybe I don't know how Jack stepped forward and reached for her hand. Not out of romance, but solidarity. "Then let's learn together." That night, Savannah walked to the edge of the motel parking lot and called her assistant. She asked her to prepare a formal proposal for a new nonprofit partnership, the Haven Initiative. She asked her to contact the board and inform them she was extending her leave indefinitely. When she hung up, she didn't feel fear. She felt free. Back inside, she opened her laptop not to check stocks or respond to pending contracts, but to open a blank document. At the top, she typed in bold, "The Haven, a place to rebuild." And below that For the girl who once believed, for the people who still do. Savannah didn't sleep much that night. It wasn't worry. More like a quiet buzz under her skin, as if her soul was wide awake while her body pretended to rest. Long after midnight, she stepped outside and sat on the hood of her Mustang, the metal still warm from the day. Above her, the sky was thick with stars, undimmed by city lights. They felt closer here, as if she could reach up and trace her fingers through them. By morning, she had made a decision. She stopped by the garage early but found it empty. Jack's truck was gone, and the bay doors were closed. A handwritten note was taped to the window. Be back before noon. Don't clean the tool. Drawers organized. Chaos has its charm. Jay. Savannah smiled despite herself and took the opportunity to walk. The town had become strangely familiar. Rosie's Diner, with its gingham curtains, the old library with its chipped stone lion, the corner store where Mrs. Hollister always slipped an extra apple into her bag without charging. It was a small town, but it had a memory, and she was becoming part of it. She wandered into the second-hand shop, a narrow building that smelled like cedar and old stories. The man behind the counter, a gentle stooped fellow named Hank, greeted her with a knowing nod. Savannah made her way to the back where the books were. She wasn't looking for anything in particular, just browsing as she used to when time wasn't currency. She pulled out a copy of East of Eden and opened it. A note fell from the pages, handwritten in neat cursive. To anyone who finds this, don't give up. Not everything that breaks needs to be thrown away. Some things just need a little care to shine again. She held the note to her chest. That was this place, this town, this man, Jack Bennett. When she returned to the garage, Jack was back wiping dust from his hands. His eyes lit up when he saw her, but she noticed something different in his expression. Not hesitation. Something heavier. I went through Lila's old boxes this morning, he said. Hadn't touched them in years. He led her to the small side room she hadn't been in before, a kind of storage nook cluttered with old furniture, photo albums, and crates of engine parts. Jack crouched and opened a wooden box with a brass latch. I found something she meant to give you, he said, then stopped. Well, someone like you. Inside was a small velvet pouch. Jack handed it to Savannah. She opened it slowly, revealing a delicate necklace with a charm in the shape of a wrench. On the handle were the initials, LB. She had these made, Jack said quietly. 5 of them. Said one day when the garage was more than just our place, she'd give them to the first girls who believed they belonged here. Savannah stared at it, breath-catching. I think you're the first one, he said. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Instead, she reached out and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't restrained. It was something old and new. At once, a connection that asked nothing, but gave everything. After a moment, Jack pulled back, eyes glassy but smiling. You're part of this now. Not because you stayed, but because you showed up. Later that day, they sat on the front steps of the garage, sipping iced tea in the shade. The heat had broken with the wind, and kids rode past on their bikes, calling out greetings. Sabrina turned to Jack. What made you keep going after she died? He thought for a long while, habit maybe, but also hope that someone would walk in one day and remind me what it felt like to care about something again. He looked at her. I didn't expect it to be you. She smiled softly. Neither did I. Jack glanced down at his hand, at the ring that still sat there, faded, worn, but whole. I'll always wear this, he said. But not because I'm stuck, because it reminds me of what I promised her and what I still believe in. Savannah reached out, touched the ring lightly. "It's not just a memory," she whispered. "It's a marker of where you've been. And maybe where we're going." He looked at her then, and for the first time didn't look away. It had been 10 days since Savannah Cole first broke down on the edge of that sun-baked road, and everything about her life had changed, except her last name. Her assistant had called back, confused but supportive, when Savannah formally transferred a portion of her personal shares to fund the Haven Initiative. The board had been stunned, but too cautious to protest. Her name still held weight, even if her title was fading. The town, however, had adapted to her presence, as though it had simply been waiting for her to remember she belonged there. She wasn't staying at the motel anymore. Rosie had offered her the back apartment above the diner in exchange for helping out a few mornings a week. Savannah didn't flinch at the idea. There was something deeply satisfying about handing coffee to someone who actually looked you in the eye when they said thank you. That morning she stood behind the counter, pouring coffee, humming along to the radio, when the bell above the door chimed. A woman stepped in, tall, commanding, in a designer trench coat despite the rising heat. Behind her, a young man trailed wearing a blazer, far too stiff for the town's air. Savannah blinked. She knew that walk. "Kathleen," she said flatly. Her former executive assistant turned PR director, removed her sunglasses and offered a brittle smile. "Savannah, you've gone native. I've gone home," Savannah said, simply handing a coffee to a truck driver who gave her a puzzled look before heading out. "We were worried. No communication for 10 days. You left the company with no word except a memo about rebuilding lives and machines." Savannah gestured toward the back booth, "Sit or leave." "But I'm not doing this by the counter." Kathleen sighed and followed her, the young man reluctantly tagging along with a tablet already loaded with presentations. Savannah slid into the booth across from them, wiped her hands on her apron, and waited. Kathleen got to the point. "They want you back. A few donors are concerned about your absence. We can brand this reframe the narrative. Philanthropy is admirable, but you're a CEO, not a small-town mechanic's girlfriend." At that, Savannah laughed. "He's not a mechanic. He's a man who built more with a wrench and grief than most of us build with power and profit." The young man looked up from his tablet. "Miss Cole, if I may. This project, the Haven Initiative, is beautifully conceived, but your name behind it matters far more than your presence." Savannah looked out the window, where Jack was helping a teenage boy lift an engine onto a platform. His face was calm, Thready. "Real. My presence is all that matters," she said. They didn't understand. Not really. And maybe they didn't need to. "I'm not coming back," she added quietly. "Not in the way you think," Kathleen frowned. "Then what should I tell them? Tell them this is my return." "Not to the office. To myself." The silence that followed was long and final. Kathleen left her a business card unnecessary, and Savannah tucked it into her apron pocket without looking hard that day. Jack didn't ask what the meeting was about. He handed her a clipboard and nodded toward a shipment of donated tools waiting to be sorted. They worked in rhythm. She called names. He lifted boxes. They laughed when a crate of hammers spilled, and Savannah nearly tripped over a torque wrench. When the sun dipped low, she found herself on the porch of the rebuilt garage, still just a frame and a promise. She looked out at the land and the kids hanging around the edge of the field, half curious, half hopeful. Jack joined her, quiet as ever. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm finally honest," she replied. "And that feels more than okay." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a key. He held it out to her. "What's this?" "The front door to the Haven. When it has one, she took. It held it in her palm like a vow. "This place you? It's not what I expected," she said. Jack smiled. "Funny, you're exactly what Lila said would come." She looked at him surprised. "What do you mean?" He leaned back against the post. "Before she died, Lila said, 'Jack, one day, a woman's going to walk in here who sees the broken and doesn't flinch. Don't you dare let her walk out again, just because you're afraid of healing.'" Savannah felt her breath catch, not from sadness, but from something far more terrifying. She looked down at the key again. "Then I guess I'm not going anywhere." The first official day of construction at the Haven started before sunrise. Jack arrived with a thermos of coffee. Savannah with a box of freshly baked cinnamon rolls from Rosie. Volunteers trickled in: teenagers, old mechanics, a single mom with paint-splattered overalls, and 2 young kids in tow. They didn't ask questions. They just showed up ready to lift hammer paint and believe. By noon, the skeleton of the main structure stood tall, framed against the pale blue sky. Savannah looked out at the bustling site. People laughing, calling instructions, measuring twice and cutting once, and felt something swell inside her. This wasn't just a building. It was a promise being fulfilled. She stood beside Jack, handing him nails, steadying boards, feeling the sun kiss the back of her neck and the future take root beneath her feet. "You know," she said, brushing a smudge of sawdust from her shirt, "I've signed contracts worth more than this entire project, but nothing has ever felt this real." Jack nodded, hammer in hand. "That's because this one has your name in it, not just on it." She smiled, and for a moment, time slowed. By evening, the group gathered for a makeshift celebration: sandwiches and lemonade, on overturned crates, music playing from someone's dusty Bluetooth speaker. The laughter was easy, unforced, the kind of joy that came from sweat and shared purpose. Then came the moment Jack stood and cleared his throat. The crowd quieted. "I don't usually make speeches," he began, voice steady, "but I think today deserves one. Most of you know this place started as a dream my sister Lila had. She believed people deserved second chances, and sometimes all they needed was someone who didn't give up on them." He paused, eyes drifting to Savannah. "I almost let go of that dream, but then someone walked in. Someone who didn't just fix her car. She saw this town, this garage, this mess of a man, and didn't flinch." A ripple of laughter moved through the group. "She reminded me of why I stayed," Jack continued. "And today, I want to pass something on." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. The crowd hushed. It wasn't the silver one, the one Lila had given him, that still sat on his hand, worn and true. This was different. A simple gold band, elegant and unassuming, but new. Untouched, Jack turned to Savannah and stepped forward. "I'm not asking for an answer today," he said gently. "This isn't a proposal in the traditional sense. I'm not giving you this ring as a symbol of what I hope you'll be to me." He paused. "I'm giving it to you because of what you already are." The silence was electric. He placed the ring in her palm, closed her fingers around it. "You've rebuilt more than a garage here," he said softly. "You've rebuilt me." Savannah's eyes filled not with shock, but with the quiet recognition of something long known. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Instead, she opened her hand, looked at the ring, then took Jack's fingers and slid the silver one from his hand. Jack froze. Savannah held both rings in her hand, one faded one shining, and looked at him. "Let me keep this," she whispered, lifting the silver band. "Let me carry it now, so you can wear this." She held out the gold ring. Jack hesitated, then nodded. Slowly, deliberately, he let her slide it onto his finger. The crowd erupted, not with fanfare, but with warmth. Applause cheers, someone whistling from the back. Rosie cried openly. Even Hank from the bookstore offered a shaky thumbs up. That night when the crowd had dispersed and the stars returned to their quiet vigil overhead, Jack and Savannah stood alone in the frame of what would soon be the main door of the Haven. "You sure?" Jack asked, looking at the ring now on his hand. "I've never been sure," Savannah said. He looked at her, something soft and eternal in his gaze. "Then we build it all together." And from that night on, the ring he never took off wasn't the one that reminded him of what he'd lost. It was the one that reminded him of everything he'd found. Fall arrived gently in the town, brushing the trees with burnt oranges and deep reds, the kind that made everything look like it had been painted in warm memory. The Haven was no longer a blueprint or a dream. It stood tall and real, with its wide front porch, big bay doors and windows that caught the morning light just right. Savannah walked through its halls barefoot that morning, her footsteps echoing softly across the polished concrete floors. Every beam, every corner, held fingerprints of hope, of work, of second chances. It smelled faintly of cedar coffee and fresh paint. Life was already beginning to move within it. The first students would arrive next week, 8 of them from neighboring towns, hand-picked for their grit, more than their grades. Some came from broken homes, some from no homes at all. But here, they would learn how to fix things, and maybe how to fix a bit of themselves, too. She paused at the back room, where Lila's original sketch of the garage hung on the wall in a new oak frame. Below it, Jack had placed a small brass plaque for Lila Bennett, who believed in rebuilding before it was beautiful. Savannah touched the edge of the frame and smiled. Outside, Jack was teaching a teenager how to sand an old fender. His sleeves were rolled up, face, sun-warmed eyes focused. He looked lighter now, not because he had forgotten, but because he had shared the weight. She walked to the porch, where Rosie was arranging chairs for the dedication ceremony. Rosie handed her a folded piece of paper, speech notes. "Just in case you freeze, I don't do freezing," Savannah teased, taking the paper anyway. "You do. Quiet pauses," Rosie said. "Long, soul-searching pauses. Those are dramatic beats," Savannah replied with mock offense. They laughed, and it felt like family. People began to arrive. Townsfolk, donors, teens with wide eyes and nervous hands. Hank from the bookstore brought a crate of used novels for the new reading room. The mayor gave a short welcome and almost cried. Jack handed out lemonade and stayed mostly in the background, just as Lila would have liked it. When it was Savannah's turn to speak, she stood beneath the overhang, the building behind her, glowing in late afternoon sun. She looked out at the crowd, dozens of faces that had become familiar, even beloved, and tucked the folded speech into her pocket. "I was supposed to read something," she began, voice steady, "but I think today calls for something else." She paused. "There was a time not long ago when I thought I had everything: power, position, wealth, and then life broke something in me. It didn't shatter all at once. It cracked slowly. Quietly, until I couldn't hear my own heart through the noise." She looked at Jack. "Then I came here because of a broken car, and I met a man who still wore a ring, not for the past, but for the promise it carried forward." Jack looked down the gold band, catching light. "This building is not just for fixing engines," Savannah continued. "It's for fixing faith in ourselves, in each other, and in what's possible when kindness has a place to grow." Applause rose gentle, genuine. Some clapped with hands, others with eyes full of gratitude. Afterward, Savannah stood alone for a moment on the porch. The crowd had moved inside. Music played softly. Someone was laughing. Jack joined her, 2 mugs of cider in hand. He handed one to her. No dramatic beats. This time, he teased. She smiled. I'm saving those for the novel. They sipped in silence. Lila would have loved this, he said quietly. She's here, Savannah replied. In every beam, every nail, and in the people who walk through these doors. He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch, the same one that once held the wrench-shaped necklace. There's one more, he said, placing it in her hand. I saved it. For the woman who made me believe all over again. She opened it. A second necklace, identical, but the initials were different this time. Esabunesor. Her breath caught. You had this made? Jack shrugged. Let's just say Rosie knows a guy. Savannah leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder. For a long time they stood like that. The sun dipped below the fields, turning the world to amber and hush. And when the stars rose, they didn't make wishes. They simply gave thanks. We'd love to know where in the world are you watching from today. It's always heartwarming to see how far these stories travel and how deeply they connect us across miles and memories. If this story speaks to you, feel free to subscribe. We share true-to-the-heart tales of love, kindness, and second chances stories that just might stay with you a little longer than expected. Thank you truly for spending part of your day with us. Your presence here means more than you know.